Okay, you're live. Thank you. Welcome to this evening's Regeneration House and Scrutiny Review Board. I'm Councillor Nicola Ralston. I'll be chairing the meeting this evening. I believe we have a number of apologies. You could give those to us, please, Lindsay.
Councillor Holmes, Lindsay and Testro have sent them.
Okay, I don't have any late items to be introduced that I've been made aware of. Are there any declarations of interests from the floor? No, lovely. Minutes held from the meeting held on the 25th of January. Are there any comments, queries, things to raise from those minutes? Okay. Move on. We've got the formidable John Hawkin this evening, who's going to go through an update for us, item 5 for Marketing Derby.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for inviting us. It's a while since I came to the screen. 3 years, I think. My sturdy assistant Anne is actually going to be pressing the buttons as we have a technological challenge, which Anne has managed to conquer. So next slide, please, as they say. What I'm going to do is just very quickly cover off who Marketing Derby is. But I've done a number of presentations now in the past few months to the same political group, so most of this is well known. But at the end, we're going to focus, particularly on the next item, on some research that we've been carrying out and some insight into the high street and what might happen. So first of all, Marketing Derby, our mission is very straightforward. It's to wave a flag in order to support and attract inward investment into the city and into the county. We're over 15 years in the operation, and we've had the same mission from day one. So our job is to get Derby on the map and use that to try to secure inward investment. Our next slide, please. Our differentiator from many inward investment agencies are our bondholders. So we have a contract with Derby City Council and with Derbyshire County Council, but our majority of funding comes from our business bondholders. So these are companies from the famous names there, everyone knows the Rolls-Royce, Toyotas, Alstoms of the world, right down to sole traders. And it really is a great illustration, I think, of Team Derby. The fact that businesses in this city are willing to put their hand in their pocket to support the promotion place in order to bring more businesses in. And indeed, some of you might have been at our annual business event, which was held not last Friday, Friday before at the Derby Theatre, and we had 450 of them in there. So it really was, a good illustration of the strength of the commitment into place that everybody has, both from civic leadership to businesses. So the bondholders are really important. It's an annual membership fee they pay. Next slide, please. We have had that sort of national recognition. So we won the Queen's Award for Enterprise in 2020. When you win that, you have it for 5 years. We have another couple of years. We actually got it the week after the lockdown, so we were unable to celebrate it for almost 2 years properly. And I think what's that recognition of, the Queen's Award, is the nature of the commitment and passion for place that we have in Derby. And so I saw that as an award for Team Derby, not just Marketing Derby. We're the only inward investment agency in the country that has it. They're not easy to get. You have to make an application, and it's a very tough, robust process that you go through to get it. We are encouraging more companies locally now to try to do that, because I think it really helps the profile of the company, the strength of the team's commitment, hopefully with sales in most companies as well. So we have the Queen's. Next is, as I said, we are one of many. Everywhere on the planet has an investing agency. The one I put up there is Invest in Lapland, just because I think it's brilliant that there is such a thing as Invest in Lapland. But there is an Invest in New York, there's an Invest in New Orleans, there's an Invest in Aberdeen, there's an Invest in everywhere. So we are that. So it's a very competitive world we live in. And some of these agencies have massive amounts of money and massive amounts of resource to try to attract investors into their area. In our part of the world, in Northern Ireland would be the best resource of the lot. They have vast amounts of hundreds of staff and millions of pounds that we simply don't have. So when we're promoting the place, we really have to promote it on its strengths and to attract businesses that really, really kind of could benefit from coming here. We hosted, obviously I can't say who, but we hosted a group from the United States on Monday morning who came to Derby and saw the sort of welcoming they can get here, saw the opportunities, and that's kind of what we're doing all the time, trying to differentiate what's about this place. So one day maybe I'll get to see like that. Where we sit, therefore, our business model is we sit between the investor and between the place. So this is where being an independent organisation really becomes a strength, because it allows us to do things slightly differently. So sometimes we're working, if you like, with the investor, trying to convince them to do X or to do Y. Sometimes we're working with the place, trying to convince them to do X or do Y. And I'm going to use some real examples in a few moments that kind of illustrate what that means in reality. Next. We had our annual meeting a couple of weeks ago, as I said. We have an annual report, which is online. These are some of the, this is an infographic of some of the metrics. The two or three that I just pull out at this point. First of all, on the right-hand side of the middle, the number of people attending events. So over 5,000 people came to our events in the past year in 2022. You must remember this is actually only as the lockdown started to lift. So this time last year, a lot of people still were confident to go to a full room of people. So what that to me shows is the commitment that we have in this part of the world for people who really want to be involved and learn more about and contribute to the development of place. And then the other numbers kind of stand up for themselves, but I'll come on to jobs and investment in a second. So next slide. We had a deep dive analysis of our impact, and over a 3-year period. So this is just before the lockdown, when we had received £2 million worth of income. So that includes the grants, the bondholder fees, and any income that we generated. And then they analysed in quite some depth the impact that we had. You can see that during those 3 years, we brought in 1,814 jobs, contributed 333 million to GBA, and so on and so forth. So for us, the input is very important, the profile, the things that we do, the events, the way we do it. But at the end of the day, without the outputs and the jobs, the investment and the taxes, then it's not worth doing. So we do keep a very tight eye on that. Next one, please. In relation to Derby City Council, in that same period, Derby City Council put just under £500,000 into us and received £5 million in various different taxes from the projects that we had worked on in that time. So the return on investment for the council, over and above jobs and investment, is quite significant. And as you well know, Derby City Council retains 50% of the business rates that are paid to you. So that is an opportunity to bring some cash in. Did you have a question?
Yeah, it starts already old, aren't they?
Yeah, this is the 3 years before COVID, when we had the deep dive analysis. It's no different now. In fact, you'll see in a second, it's better. Next. So what that shows is the business rates paid into Derby City Council in a cumulative way since we first started doing the inward investment work. So you can see in the period ending the end of March 2023, and this is to your point, Councillor Pandy, £4.4 million of business rates has come into the council. So you're saying you're keeping 2.2 million effectively. And the grant that we got last year was 142,000. So it's more than 1 in 10 now. And you can see since we started, and it's only just business rates. I don't want us to be judged just on business rates, but it is important because your resources and your incomes have been so stretched in other areas. Anywhere where you can get extra cash, things that actually people won't see, which is more jobs in the city, probably is quite a good thing to do.
So when
more and more local authorities are looking at it that way. Yeah.
When you say cumulative, this is added to each year.
Yeah.
And those that have potentially, when we've seen dips, those that have
If they've disappeared, that's why it goes down. You can see from 2020 to 21,
So
that means somebody disappeared or shut down.
Every year going up in that.
Yeah, the new is added on and added on. Yeah.
Cumulative.
Yeah. Next.
Can I just say something, John?
Yeah.
Just to kind of say, John does bring in bigger businesses, because a lot of the small business get a lot of business rates relief, which doesn't happen. So this is in addition to that. So he does bring in big players that actually generate that revenue for the city.
Okay, next up. And we just put this quote in. We used it at our annual event a few weeks ago. He's a guru in the sort of inward investment world globally. So he does a global review of inward investment agencies across the world at the end of every year. And he picked 2 out last year from the UK. One was us, as he was saying that. And kind of what he's recognising is the business model that we have, this partnership that we have between the local authority and the private sector is quite unique. And it allows us, first of all, to have more resources, because we're not demanding those resources off the local authority, but also this idea of programme. I like his phrase, magnificent programmes, activities. I don't know what he means there, but he's very happy with what we do. And the bondholder model works. Next. So I'm going to go through about 3 or 4 very quick examples of what does that mean in reality. where we've worked in partnership in order to attract investment, and sometimes the legacy that has beyond, I don't want this to be about business rates, but beyond the sort of financial benefits. We talk about the Invest in Derby red carpet. So in other words, we roll out the red carpets to potential investors. That's what I was doing yesterday with these people. And you listen very carefully to what it is their key success factors are, what their critical determinants are for making the decision. So, and then you try to react to how it might work for this place. So these real examples I kind of give now. So the first one up is, next is about legacy really. So 3 pictures there. The picture on the left is the copper box. So the copper box, 1 Friegate Square, that was an inward investment that came out of one of our visits to MIPIM, which is the World Property Show, which we're going to next week. We run an event at that. This investor who was from Monaco came to one of our events. We didn't even know he was there actually. Came the following year, liked what he heard, then came up and spoke to us, said, I've never been to Derby, but I'd quite like to have a look and see if there's any opportunities for us to work there. Cut a long story short, after a couple of years, he built that. Originally, it's an office block, as we all know. Derby City Council were engaged in it because the Regeneration Fund existed at the time and a loan was given to them to fund that. So Derby City Council were part funders but made money. The loan was paid 100% plus interest. And then the building behind, which is the Resi building for students, was them as well, the same company. So that's a success in terms of starting to regenerate a certain part of the city and bringing that in. But the reason why I put it on this one is the legacy of something like that can sometimes be unpredicted. And what's happened since then, as we know, the university has started to look at its footprint and it's started to think maybe it needs a bigger footprint in the centre of the city, because a lot of students now want to be city-based, and Derby University is kind of campus, not way out in the middle of nowhere, but far enough out for it to feel that it's not part of place. So the business school is the one in the middle. Got nothing to do with that, except it's across the road from the building on the left. So they bought that piece of land. They've raised £75 million in the markets to build a business school, which is going to be under construction kind of now. And we'll start to bring eventually 6,000 students into that part of the city, really changing the feel of that part of Derby. Then the building on the right is something we're taking out to Cannes next week. That's the dream picture, as I call it, is moving more of the campus from Kedleston Road into that part of Ford Street, that part of the city. So at the moment, the one on the left is done, the one in the middle is underway, and the one on the right is just a dream. So one of the things, I've got a meeting with the university tomorrow, is how can we attract investors to kind of put money into that type of thing and really start to, then you've suddenly got a university city campus, probably equating to the same size of what they have out at Kedleston Road. So I'll put that one up because it came out of nowhere. We did that red carpet for that investor. They were happy enough to build a second building, and then the legacy, which we're part of, but we're not claiming that as an inward investment, is on the way at the moment. Next one is Nightingale Quarter. So I was there with them today. We first met them about 4 years ago. There've been a couple of iterations at the Nightingale Quarter in terms of different schemes that have been proposed in different types of ways. The good news is that residential scheme is flying, and if anyone's been down there recently, you'll see that there's about, I spoke to them today, by the end of this year, 1,000 people will be living on that site that weren't living on that site at the beginning of this year. So that excludes anyone who's already there. So there's going to be 2,500 people living there in about 2 years' time. And this is an 18-acre site. It's flying off the shelf in terms of people renting and buying. Everything they've done so far has been sold. So we would work with an investor, obviously we'll help bring them in here, but ever since then we've been working with them to build their confidence in place. So when they've had problems, they come to us. So the red carpet, in other words, isn't just about attracting the investor, it's about working with them afterwards in different ways. They probably have some ambitions to do more in the city. So next up is TK Maxx. This is one which Catherine worked with us on. So Albion Street, we know Albion Street, pretty distressed street. In ownership, both sides owned by different funds. Absentee landlords is sometimes what we call it. But one of the owner of the block on the left, where TK Maxx is there, came to us. They had a contact in with TK Maxx. TK Maxx is the world's second largest retailer, which I have no idea it's so big. If you've been in America, you'll know it's TJ Maxx. It's kind of everywhere. And they had a particular formula. They would, they'd moved out of the city, as you know. They were just around the corner before. They moved to Kingsway with a massive site. And for us, in terms of repurposing and starting to bring some footfall back in the city, and that's a very attractive picture of Albion Street. I've never seen it look so good. Is that what they needed was a little bit of support and help in making it work for them. So and basically their issue was levels. Albion Street is a hill, more a hill than you think, actually. It's quite a drop from one end to the other. And they will only go into stores where it's level and they have escalators. And that's where we worked with them very closely. The council managed to find a little bit of a grant to give to them, and that made it happen. And that kind of, sometimes I describe as a bunch of flowers, but that sort of intent of working with the local authority and working with the Inwood Investment Agency, working with the occupier and the landlord, sometimes is what leads to success, because they can take their business anywhere on the planet effectively, and they've took it to Derby. Probably didn't have the impact we wanted in terms of impacting some of the empty properties around. That still is a bit distressed, but they're still there, they're still trading, which is good, and obviously paying their business rates. That's TK Maxx. Next up is just round the corner from here, really, which is the Wardwick, which is Bamboo and Cloud. You can see there, that's the Bamboo and Cloud team, along with Paul Simpson, myself, and a few others. They are an IT company. They wanted their direction of travel is, in order for them to attract and retain the talented workforce they wanted, they didn't want to be on a business park. They wanted to come into a city centre. And their brief was very much, we don't want a bog standard office block, we want something different. So we ended up with them moving into a building which has had various iterations. It's been a nightclub, it was a bank, get back far enough, and it'd been empty for 10 years. And again, there was another set of grants from the government called the Additional Restrictions Grant, ARG, and they received a small amount of money from ARG, but again, it just helped to sweeten the deal for them to invest in repurposing the building as an office, and then having these people move into it. They have just been bought by a large American corporation called Pax8, which is based in Denver, Colorado. I was with them again last week, and it could well be that they might soon be growing because of the investment that they now have, and this global sort of backer they have. And they love coming to Derby, and they love going to that particular office. So again, but from a city centre point of view, which I know you guys have been talking about, this is what regeneration looks like. A building, beautiful building that's been empty for a decade or more, is repurposed with a different use. And there is a price to pay for that. You have to make certain compromises in order to make that happen, but it has been made to happen here. Next one is just moving slightly out of town. So this was announced about 3 or 4 weeks ago. So this is Valent. Valent are a German company. They're a $3 billion turnover company, heat manufacturing. So we would know them locally as Glowworm, based in Belpac. And they make boilers, gas boilers for your houses. So we've probably all got, something like that in our homes. That product is effectively going to be made illegal soon. It will be against the law to put a gas boiler into a new home from 2025 and into any home from 2030. So you've got a business there looking at its business model thinking, hang on, the product that we make and that we're a world leader in is increasingly being ruled out by legislation in various different countries, and UK is no different from most of Europe in this one. So they're now moving into heat pumps, so it's a diversification for them. They have just taken this 120,000 square feet on St Modwyn's Park, which is, we know it as the Chatterton Triangle, or it's been known as various different words. City Council and Martin Derby worked really closely on this one under the radar for about a year to kind of help make it happen. Previously, Derby City Council has spent a lot of money on the A52 roadworks. Well, this is something actually where that's paying off now, because the one thing that site has is excellent access, and whatever the rights and wrongs of whatever happened with those works, actually now we're starting to get some payback on it. And that building was built speculatively. The money's from New York. It's from a group called Blackstone, who built the building speculatively. And this is roughly 200 plus new jobs. Part of the city's strategy is to diversify our economy. As we came out of COVID in the Derby Economic Regeneration group that I sit on, there was a feeling that, yes, it's great to have planes, trains and automobiles, but we must continue to diversify the economy attracting jobs in that are also equally appropriate. So we're not got too many eggs in one basket. So this is a good example of that. So these are green tech jobs, if you were talking kind of to a government minister, in a very, very good company. Next up on the same site is Yettinga. Again, we might know them as Quadriline. There's a bit of it called Quadriline, which is on Bateman Street, for those of you who know that part of the city. They've been there for a while. They've been taken over by this large Swedish corporation, £2 billion company, I should say. And they have now declared Derby as a UK HQ. So what that's going to do is bring a lot of jobs into St Modwen's Park again. So St Modwen's Park is quite an upscale park, actually. And if it's not kind of Ascot Drive, it's something slightly different. The money that's gone in there, there's thousands of trees being planted, there's lakes, there's cycle paths. They're trying to do it slightly differently. And what's great now is that the companies that kind of, sometimes you set the tone by doing a certain thing. We've set a tone there now where suddenly you've got a German green tech, now you've got Swedish green tech. We're working with one or two others at the moment. So it's like, well, hang on, let's talk about that. So from an area that's really been a problem for the city for as long as I can remember, Chaps and Triangles, like what the hell is it and how do you get to it? Well, suddenly it's going to be employing hundreds, if not thousands of people. And they're also putting their global centre of excellence for chemistry there and also opening a training academy. It's one of the things we've noticed with all of these new employers is they're all into training apprentices. So there is this, and I think Derby is very strong for that in terms of people who are willing to do T-level type approaches to work as you learn, as opposed to some of the more traditional ways. So Yettinga is a good news story. Again, we work really closely with them. They were introduced at one of our embassies. So one of those magnificent events that Iman was talking about earlier would have been our embassies that we hold in London. The first time City Council leader Chris Poulter and Paul Simpson met with the representatives from the Swedish company was in London in an informal situation where they just had a chat. It's kind of like, we'd love to have you in Derby. If you ever kind of come into town, give us a call. You cannot underestimate how important that is because you don't often get that in a lot of places. And this is where the Team Derby thing really comes into play for me. People are really, one of the Americans said to me on Monday morning, with you, everyone's so passionate about the place. We've come across that before. So that's where that will work. So next one, please. We have a Derby City Lab, which is trying to attract get some of the, going back to the city centre now, trying to, it's a partnership with, the building's owned by Clowes, by David Clowes. We rent it for a year. We just had an extension to the end of this year. We hold exhibitions in there. We hold conferences exhibitions, focus groups and the like. And also the Derby public can go in when it's open and find out what's happening with the city and what's this about, what's that about. One of the things that strikes me is not many know much about what's going on, even the performance venue. And you can almost say, look, if you go out and just take a right, you'll see the land where it's going to be, and they still don't believe it's going to be there. Well, is it really real, or is it just a CGI? So it's a tool for us to help with that. And we also host exhibitions. So Format have put an exhibition in there from next week for a month. So we try to become part of the community on that. So the City Lab is an important part of our next phase development on St James Street. Next one, please. Also, being proactive, we try to pull the stakeholders together. So Irongate, for me, Irongate's a sad street because it used to be Great Britain. It was the best high street in the UK, 2015, 2016, sometime around then. Doesn't take much in a small street for a few vacancies to suddenly make it feel different. So we're now pulling together some of the occupiers and some of the landlords on that street, none of whom know each other or have met each other, which always astonishes me. You know, neighbours have never met neighbours, to say, all they're looking for is a signal. Do they invest or do they kind of sit on the asset? And what we're trying to do is obviously turn that signal into a 51%, glass half full. It's worth investing. So we're working very closely with those on that because that street should not be allowed to decline any further than what it is at the moment. So there are too many. The Venice building, for example, people in Venice building is one of those that we're working with. They're one of the things that they have just submitted a planning application actually to redo the Venice building, repurpose it. So it means some demolition at the back, which is a bit of a mess. If you've ever been around the back, you'll know what I mean. Maybe taking out about a third of the space, but then have something which actually will function as an office, as resi, and as a bit of leisure retail on the ground floor. Next, please, this one is an area much tougher. To get your bearings, the performance venue, where that pile of bricks is, that's where the performance venue is going to be. So this is the back of the performance venue, if you like. The images are all from the Beckett Well side of it. This is the other side. You will be able to walk in. There's a side way where you can go in and out. That area behind it doesn't even have an identity we don't know what it's called because it's not called anything. But you've kind of got Curzon Street, Beckett Street, Bramble Street, all those sort of streets. Walk around there and you'll think it doesn't quite add up. It's not a pleasant place. There's a lot of empty buildings. It has a kind of general feel of a sort of air of threat in the evening and at night. Yet thousands upon thousands of people are going to walk through that area to go to the performance venue. Most people from the west side of the city, when they come into town, will probably park on Abbey Street side or Bold Lane side, and their way into performance venue might well be through there. So we've started to identify who the landlords are, identify who these empty buildings are, and then starting to see is there's things that we can work with them to actually say, look, coming down the line, you've got this massive opportunity, you've got a performance venue, you've got 350,000 people in there every year. Time to invest in your business, time to raise your game a little bit. So we'll see where we get with that one. That's a tough one, but we've got 2 years roughly, to me, before that opens. So if we can improve it over the next 2 years, then all the better. Then maybe it'll pick up a bit more as people are starting down the streets.
We did ask them actually, Chair of Planning, we asked them to improve the look of the performance venue from Beckett Street by sort of signage or murals or something, because it looked very, very plain, and it was more of a sort of, dreary office building when you looked at it from that side. So I don't know what they have done to improve it, because they've not really shown us their alterations yet.
Councillor Khan, I can probably help with that, in that I know they have drawn up proposals for using lighting in particular to give some more animation to that space. So I'll take that away and ask them to share those proposals with you as Chair of Planning.
It's a really good point. But I guess what we're saying is the experience, having the performance venue is great, but what we need people who go to the performance venue to do is spend more time and money in the city, not just go to the performance and run away. We need them to go beforehand and hopefully even after. Just spend some more cash in the city, have a meal, have a drink, meet friends, and so on and so forth. And unless we improve that side of it, I think that's going to be quite difficult to do there. So that's something we're working on for the next 2 years next. Yeah, so this is the final bit. This is an insight into an unfinished piece of work, but I thought it'd be interesting for you guys to see it, particularly leading into what Vernon and Catherine are probably going to talk about, regeneration of the high street. Some of you will know this, the city over the past 15 years has commissioned from time to time CACI, who are the kind of market leaders in analysis of demographics and footfall and all of that. So this is the 4th such report, and we've commissioned it because we wanted a feel of, well, what's happened post-COVID? What does Derby look like post-COVID? So you're probably just far enough down now to do that. So all this was carried out at the end of last year, beginning of this year. It uses the technologies that are available now that weren't available 10 or 15 years ago. So it's always, this type of information has always used credit cards and stuff like that, but now uses phone technology. So we're able to track who comes into the city, where they come from, how long they're there, where they go to, how they get from A to B and stuff like that. And in big data, you can't actually spot one person, but you can use big data to come. I'll show you how this works in a second. So what it's given us is an insight into, and we'll be sharing this with the Derby City Partnership Board in a couple of weeks' time, and then obviously with the city centre groups and all of that, and the bids and everyone else. We're doing this as open source, so everyone can have a look at the report. But what it does is some of it's counterintuitive. You think, oh, really, is that really the case? Whatever these numbers are, they're true. So whether they feel right or not, they're true. So the 2 I'll pick out from here, good news, is the top middle. Derby is dominant across its catchments. So Derby has a catchment of just over 1 million people. You can see that in the top left. So what that means is people who live within sort of striking distance of the city centre. It's not just the city itself, but the boroughs around Everton, South Derbyshire, and a bit further into East Staffordshire and things like that. So there's massively much is what that means. Since COVID, rather interestingly, our market share of that catchment has gone up from 11 to 27%, which is a massive increase. So at first you think, oh, okay, that's quite a lot of people. What it is illustrating is actually people are staying closer to home, which I think we probably know post-COVID we have been. So people probably got out of habits in the first instance, not re-established those habits yet, but feel more comfortable being closer to home. The top right, the affluent achievers. So these are people, we often talk about the people who work in Derby who earn these high salaries and these techie companies we talk about. We're now getting more of them coming into the city, 13% up to 19%. So again, a reasonably significant increase. So there's more in there, but I won't go into that. Next one, please. This shows the catchment spend. Catherine would have worked with this sort of stuff before, but we're now at 551 million resident spend, which is very strong. So Derby has a very strong resident catchment spend. It's 22nd in the country. So we're just behind Edinburgh and we're just ahead of Cardiff. So that places us. That's what I mean by counterintuitive. But that's resident spend. And that, once you know Derby well enough, you know we have all these people doing all these jobs. So we have a very strong demographic in the area. Tourism spend, we're trying to track as where that was before, but to me that's gone up a little bit. So more people are coming into the city. I just wonder whether that's the beginning of the impact of the Museum of Making, which has been so incredibly successful. Worker spend is down. So this is working from home and the fact there are so few offices in the city centre. Again, you just need to walk around any day, you can't see that. So what that gives us is the beginning of a baseline, if you like, that we can now track what happens in the future. Next one, please. What this one shows is, don't bother reading it, but 22nd is Derby, you can see there, and that's my point. You can see Edinburgh just above this. You can see Norwich, Leicester, Foss Park, behind us, Gateshead, Metro Centre, Southampton, Cardiff, and the like. So we're very strong. We're in the top 1% of all UK retail centres. Next. This is our demographic. Very wealthy on the left, very poor on the right. The black bars are the national averages. And then the coloured bar is Derby's area, and the grey shaded bar is the East Midlands, if you want to compare regional. I won't go into any great detail here, but what that shows is we punch well above the national and regional average on some of the most affluent demographics, and also in the comfortable communities. So if you think about your little overs, your middle overs, and your Duffields and your Belpers, kind of that's what that covers. So there's a lot of money in the economy, and if we can retain more of that money by creating jobs and people spending, then it will benefit people on the right-hand side, where again, on some of those, we punch well above. One of the things I often say is we have the highest salaries out of any city outside of London, but we also have one of the worst social mobility problems. And I think that inward investment can be used as a tool to address that social mobility. That's what. So these last three slides show how we can track where people are now. There's a lot more of this, but I've just chosen 2 or 3 top ones. So this is afternoon footfall. So just to get I mean, most of you know Derby very well. So you've got the railway station in the bottom right, you've got Castle Ward, and then the DRI. You can almost see the London Road span. Then in the first big red circle, that's the Derby on. And then the second circle above it, that's the bus station. And then you can almost see the spine of St. Peter Street drifting into the Cathedral Quarter. What that shows is 2 things. First of all, it shows a massive heat map on the south side of the city. So some of those, you remember those things I said earlier about the number of people coming into the city from the catchment, the number of achieved wealthy people in the city, they're going into the Derby on, right? So Derby is doing very well. Now the Derby on supports 7,000 jobs. So if you look at it as an employer, it doesn't employ 7,000, but 7,000 jobs are in there in different employment. It's a massive local employer. It may, outside Rolls-Royces and the public sector is the next biggest employer. And most people who work at the Derby on live in Derby. So it's a massive local employer. So you just have to kind of give that recognition. But what you do see is, so that might explain some of those earlier things I said earlier about that were counterintuitive. But then the rest of the city, you can see it's pretty sparse. Put the next one up. So this one moves now to evening footfall. Now you'll see it's a much more even spread. The Derby on shrunk massively because obviously you've got cinema there, you've got some retail and some restaurants, but you're starting now to get hot spots outside, particularly in the Cathedral Quarter. You can see the quad, see the first red thing, you can see the impact of the quad there straight away. And then on the very north, you can probably see the impact of things like Dada and things like that at the sort of top end of the city centre as well. So what's interesting is that we've got a morning, noon, afternoon and evening versions of this, and we've got which demographics they are that are coming in. The last one I'll show you, and this is my last slide, I think, is just imagine the future. So if you've got the Market Hall open just across the way there, where at the moment there's nobody because nobody goes in it because you can't. If that is a successful enterprise, it opens next summer, that will start to impact on that part of the city. Think about the performance venue, there's 350,000 people, which I think is a minimum. You'll see that start to spread as well. So in other words, the strategy that we have as a place in repurposing the city centre, some of it is about living, some of it is about visiting, and some of it is about working, we'll be able to measure the success of it just by doing this again in 2 or 3 years' time and just starting to track what's happening. And that, for me, is where we work very closely with Regen and with the City Council, is in terms of the types of investment we need to attract into the city centre. To a certain extent, you need, if you haven't got feet on the street doing whatever it is they're doing, whether they're going back to their apartment, going into their job, or just shopping, or just going to a show, that's the way money spreads around the city centre. So that's the main hope for it. So I'll end at that particular point, Nick, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Some real positives there. There's obviously been, Derby's almost been in a point of where we're ready to grow, and now is the time, isn't it? At the end of the day, short of what you're saying there, we've done the groundwork, and all we can see now is all this investment coming in, whether that's in the Derby Triangle or the other side of the Pride Park that I know it as. Or down at bottom end of Spondon and in the old Courtauld sites. There's so much coming to Derby jobs wise, and that will inevitably push forward and push down into the markets and the availability of spend in the city. So absolutely, it's the right time for any investor to come to Derby, get the foot in the door and move forward. Are there any questions from anybody else in terms of the information that John's provided for us this evening?
No, I think it was quite thorough.
Excellent, thank you very much. Absolutely fantastic to see
Pleasure.
all the work and effort that's gone in and continues to help Derby grow.
Thank you very much.
You're more than welcome to stay for the
I'm
rest of the
going to
meeting.
stay a little bit.
But by all means, if you're ready to leave.
That's okay with you.
Item 6 then is our update on the city centre vision and the regeneration of the high street, and that's Verna and
It is. We're going to do a bit of a double act, if we may, to take you through an update on these, not just on the reinventing the city centre and then the high street, but just the city centre overall. So we flick over. So I think we came to this board last year, or I think we did, to talk about what we were doing with the city centre vision. So just a little bit of a quick recap on that, really. So really it was, as John's been saying, the things we want to do, we want to have a more cohesive, more holistic approach to the city centre. So I think what we clearly saw the need for was to develop something which was around, which we could all embrace and all work together with, and a clear direction for how we want the city centre to look, how we want it to feel, and how important that will be to the future of Derby. Because COVID really accelerated some of the trends, the retail, the online shopping, the working from home, all those sorts of things that we know have been happening slowly, but COVID then accelerated some of that. And we saw some of the harsh realities of that, increased vacancies on the high street, etc. So it was clear that we needed to do something, accepting that this needs to be short, medium, long term. We need to think about it that in those 3 phases. The city centre vision is very much the long term. So where are we going for the city over the next 30, 40, 50 years? And that's what we really wanted to do. We wanted to look something wasn't just about the buildings, the traditional sort of spatial plan, which our previous master plan had been more on key projects. We wanted to look something that was more about the spaces and places in between those buildings, not just the buildings themselves. And we knew that delivery of that was going to be crucial. So next slide. So what we created was something called an ambition document, and we did that based on a really extensive conversations with the key stakeholders in the city, and we put together a document which we published in the summer of 2022. And that really set out some of the key themes that we felt needed to be addressed. And these are on these next couple of slides. But I guess what we then did was have a long conversation with the city about that, about had we got it right, and had we got the right level of ambition in that document, which is why we took that name. And we did it in lots of ways. We had a Let's Talk Derby platform, which people could interact with. We had a public survey. We created a BSL signed video. We had drop-in centres at the City Lab, which John has already talked about, and then lots of targeted conversations with key groups around the city, from Voices in Action and young people, SEN ambassadors meeting, the Heritage Advisory Committee, Qualities Hub, all sorts of people we went to talk to, really have a rich and deep conversation about the city and had we got these themes right. So they are, you know, all the things that I think you probably all expect, nothing surprising in here. Climate change has obviously ramped up as a key theme across the last few years. So how will the city look and feel? How are we responding to mitigation and adaptation to climate change? We think that we want to put arts and culture at the centre of what a city centre would be like and be used for. Again, some of the things that John's just been talking around that nighttime economy. Looking at improved connectivity, it's you know, we've got a very, very walkable city centre. It's really, really easy to get around, you know, but are we doing that as well as we might be? How do we feel about the role of the car in the city centre, etc.? And how do we, I think one of the things we often talk about the inner ring road being a concrete collar. It's an expression I've heard a lot. So things like the university building that John was talking about and the master plan around the copper building, there's a massive, you know, part of the inner ring road is sitting there. So how do we tame that inner ring road? How do we make it more permeable for people to move across it and move in and out of the city centre so that it's not, doesn't feel like it's so bounded by the road network? Making most of the river. I think that's something I've heard so many people say ever since I've ever worked in Derby. We don't make the most of it. How do we link towards the river? With that, obviously bearing in mind going back to climate change, are we looking at flood mitigation, Ossity, our river project, etc.? And again, another thing that comes up a lot in Derby, you know, we often think of the heritage and conservation being quite a contentious area, but actually what we felt came through and what we wanted to talk about to people was how they felt about the heritage of the city, and how do we use that as an asset rather than something that, you know, is seen as a barrier to change. More representative of our city, so something that reflects ourselves and Derby. Next slide. And then again, city living, we've talked, we know that Castle Ward, DRI, Beckett, well, all those things are ongoing. So how are people going to live in the city centre? How is it going to feel if you're living your daily life in there, not just popping in to go to the shops or go to work? It's a very different place. I've talked about culture being at the heart of that, talked about workspace. Again, you know, how do we use that centre? Places like Bamboo Cloud, places like Cubo, how a more flexible approach to working, and how might we then encourage people to come back into the city centre? And public realm, again, possibly linked to climate change, but, you know, what are the spaces and places? How do we move between those buildings? So we felt those were some of the key things to talk about. And the next bit is sort of hot off the press, really, because we haven't done all the analysis on the feedback from because you can imagine it's very rich. I think the initial first cut of the consultation document is, you know, close on 1,000 pages of text, because as you can imagine, people don't just want to say, yes, I like it, no, I like it. They want to tell you a story about it, tell you how it feels for them. So it's been quite a technical masterpiece to get through some of it. But these are, again, some of the main things that have come out of the feedback that we had, and I'm sure none of them will be a surprise to you, which is a good thing. People felt that the city centre should be people-centred, so that we get, as John has alluded to, more people spending time there, wanting to linger there, wanting to spend their money there, wanting to make most of it. But it really feels like the heart of the city. And I guess some of that is, you know, how people come in from the districts and how you might feel about what's close to you in your district centre. But then what do you get in that experience of going into the city centre, and how does that feel? This question of quality came in time and time again. You know, what does quality mean, and what is quality about the spaces between the buildings? Not just that we have great quality buildings, but actually what does that public realm look like in between, and how are we best using it? Not just about the materials, but how do those spaces relate to each other? How does the going down this take you on a route and a journey through the city and then enliven and create vibrancy across the whole place? Green and blue infrastructure. How do we get more water into the city centre, for example? I mean, you know, that's something that a lot of other places use very successfully. You think about the entrance that Sheffield uses through its train station, that fantastic, great big water feature. Now, how can we use that in a playful way in Derby, which again creates that, you know, comfortable environment where people want to linger and spend more time? One of the ideas in the ambition document was the city centre park. you know, people are very, very keen to get more green space and more of, you know, we know that it's not a city centre that is overly green, but then there are, you know, Basses Rex just over to the side, that frontage along the river, how can we join those up to make something that is a much bigger place to act as a public park? Definitely the acknowledging that our heritage as an economic asset. So it's not just something that we have as you know, something that we have in aspect, but we actually engage with that heritage, and something people came back really proud of. Really proud of those buildings, and a really unique part of Derby, really sets it apart on how we see it in relation to other cities. And we do have to remember that this is a competition with other cities, you know, even though we are obviously fabulous, as John has explained, and clearly doing better than Nottingham, which was surprising to see. But you know, we know that we're in a competition with with cities globally. Again, there was that concept of taming the ring road was quite hard for people to grasp. But once we talked about it, particularly in some of the sessions, I think people could understand it. Different with parking though, and I'm sure you'll all have your own views about it. And that came back very clearly through the feedback. There's an absolute groundswell of people who feel that getting into the city centre and being as close as you can to where you live and your building and your space is important. But actually, then there's an equal and opposite view that came through very strongly, as there are too many cars in the city centre now to make it a pleasant and clean environment, to have any attraction with air quality, etc. We need to manage that in a different way. So it's been a really interesting journey, and interesting to see what's coming back. I think that probably the final thing I would say was around, you know, being clear. We talk about lots of different quarters of the city, being clear about what those different areas and zones of the city are and how they describe what the city means to the people that use it. And other areas of the city, the railway quarter particularly was mentioned as, you know, that should be enveloped as part of the city centre vision. And how do we make more of that, and that translation from the railway station up into the city centre? So there's lots of work to do to really drill down on the document. There's lots of rich information in there that I think we're going to come back to as we work on it. And we need to ensure that some of that momentum of the conversation that we've started isn't lost. I think we're absolutely clear, and as Catherine will explain, that, you know, Regen and the city centre is a priority for us as a city council, accepting that we have budget pressures that are going to, you know, challenge us along the way. Our next step for this vision is to this year we want to create, I think we perhaps had a big ambition when we started it to do something quite grand. I think we need to do something which is a much shorter, snappier version of the vision, which really just sets out the key elements that we want as succinctly as we want, but something we can use with prospective developers, with investors and interested parties, with the community of the city centre. So that's what we'll probably look to doing towards the summer, but we will also obviously come back when we've really analysed the consultation in more detail. So again, fantastic. I think it's been a really, really worthwhile exercise. It's really galvanised the passion and the focus on the city centre and really brought everybody together. But we weren't starting from a blank canvas, and I'll hand over to Catherine to talk about some of those schemes.
Yeah, go ahead.
The plan looks really grand, but you talked about the budget. Is that going to come next? The budgeting?
Well, the budget. There's the city council's budget. Obviously, the plan of the ambition for the city centre overall isn't just dependent on the city council's budget. You know, this is about getting that investor confidence and developer confidence, how we're working and shaping what comes into the city, working with people like John to say this is where we want. And again, this is a long-term vision. Remember, the vision is around 30, 40, 50 years. That isn't the today of the budget pressures that the council faces.
Where is the money going to come from? This is my question. You can plan anything you want, you know, but where's the money going to come from?
So the money will come through the projects that we're doing now, the projects that are on the ground, and a key part of it is as you say, the delivery and the delivery plan. And again, Catherine will come on to how we're going to do that perhaps in a different way than we've done before. Because as I say, this can't be the city council will be able to intervene where only the city council can, but it will not do all of these things.
We appreciate that there'll be elements of funding applications from
Absolutely.
national government. You know, we one of our topic reviews that we've been keen to look at this year, but just haven't had the. I know that conversations have gone on in the background around social value and the impact assessments of Regen, and trying to get these companies to invest in the city and bring that value to the city, not just the jobs, but also what they, you know, the impact that brings to us. We saw some great demonstrations of that from John, but I think those are the sorts of things that we hope will come into fruition as these bigger companies come in. We see that more investment, we see more opportunities, and as these areas footfall increases, you know, we will have an opportunity to utilise that income from business rates and various others to improve the area as we are.
Councillor, just to add a little to Werner's answer there, that Werner's right, it will be a combination, because any delivery plan that emerges from this vision will have a list of priorities, and we'll have to identify how those priorities can be resourced and funded. Clearly, the council's own current budgetary position is such that we're committed to a number of projects that I'll come on to give updates about, but we are more constrained now in terms of our direct investment in projects and also our capacity to deliver, given the MTFP proposals that have obviously been well poured over in recent weeks. I guess the two things I would highlight is, firstly, John mentioned it earlier, we have a city centre programme board that is a partnership very much focused on owning and supporting the delivery of this vision. And in addition to local key stakeholders like Marketing Derby and the university, we've also got the Environment Agency, Historic England, Severn Trent, the East Midlands Development Company. All of those organisations come with their own resource and capacity, and we're already seeing examples of that partnership leading to investment in Derby that might not have happened before, and I'll give you a couple of examples of that later on in the presentation. External funding, obviously from government sources, central government sources is still an option. Again, I'll give you some of those examples. And the final point is a different approach to regeneration that we're looking to take, that's recently been to Cabinet, around procuring a strategic development partner for a number of key sites in the city to work with us in a different way than maybe we have before, to leverage more effectively the private sector's contribution to regeneration. Because we've done things very much on a project by project basis, but what we're trying to do through this new approach I'll talk about is do that more strategically over a wider area, so we have more long-term investment from a key development partner. So just to link though, obviously what Werner said and your question to what hopefully I'll come on to talk about.
Very short question. So like you're saying the private investors will develop area by area, but the common areas will still be under the council control, and they will require investment by the council to develop them.
In terms of common areas, if you mean the public realm, then it will mean the public sector investing in those, apart from those areas where we may be able to leverage some Section 106 contributions to support it. Viability is challenging. There's no hiding from that. We know that, but that's where partners like, for example, Severn Trent potentially come into play, because we're talking to them about how their aspirations for investing in their network and their infrastructure might support and unlock some different approaches to public realm in the city. So you're right, I would say public sector rather than city council in terms of the resourcing of public realm. But yes, you're right, that is important, as Werner said, because that's the kind of glue that knits together a number of the projects and helps people to navigate the city centre, encourages them to make their way through the city centre, to spend in different parts than they might do otherwise and spend time there. So yeah, shall I? I'm just conscious of time, so I'll try and whiz through. So very quickly then, I'm going to cover a bit of short, medium and long term kind of view in terms of updating on key projects and developments that are happening now. And the first one I'll just reference, and this is an example of where we're obviously securing central government funding through the Shared Prosperity Fund. We've got three themes within that fund, and Derby's been awarded £6 million under the SPF to invest in our city. And the very near term investment is in communities in place. That's the area that we need to spend first. And we've identified the city centre as a key priority for that. So there's a number of things that we're looking at the moment, and we've invited obviously expressions of interest from other organisations to give us ideas and bring forward project ideas. There's other work around business support and skills that's open at the moment, but I bring this in because there's work we're doing with, for example, Down to Earth to support their electric daisy concept on Bold Lane, and that will in the very near future bring a very different offer to the city centre, a community garden, leisure and event space to bring footfall to the Cathedral Quarter and support the use of a site very close to Anne's Heart, right next to Saddlebridge Studios. So yeah, currently unutilised site. So just as we were talking about historic buildings, this is an example of using unused space to bring animation. And then we're also looking at supporting tourism, creative industries and culture and events to, you know, in the very near term, bring animation and vibrancy to the city centre. There's Derby Mobility Programme as well. And I think, Bernie, you're just going to summarise what's happening on that.
Yeah, so the mobility programme was part of the National Transforming Cities Fund programme, which we successfully bid for with Nottingham, jointly with Nottingham City Council. So that's about £60 million worth of improvements in and around the city. Very much the aim of it is to connect people to work and employment and learning. And so I'd split it down into maybe sort of three main areas. So active travel. So how do we make it easier for people to get around on a bike or through walking? So some of the key routes that we're looking at are city centre to Mickleover, city centre to Rainsway, city centre to the railway. And you've probably already know that the work's going ahead on the spot already. So we're out there improving the look and feel of the space around the road network, and we'll be doing a big project on Victoria and Albert Street. Other buses and public transport specifically. So looking at the key corridors, the key bus corridors coming in and out of the city centre, improving bus shelters, improving stops, putting quality real-time information in those stops. Doing things like improving, one of the ideas is around a demand responsive transport. So, you know, a transport that you'll be able to flag, almost like an Uber bus. Very difficult in the current climate because of this funding is all capital and not revenue, but something we're very keen to try and get over the line. And then some of it was in a lot of investment in back office and technology. So things like Pentagon Island has had a complete traffic signals revamp, and those signals, and again on those key bus corridors, talk to the buses and can improve journey times in and out of the city. And then there are other things like grant supports to business for travel to work. And the Transforming Cities Fund programme includes something called the Future Transport Zones funding as well, which will include things like the e-scooters, the scheme that we work. We're about to hopefully we will be getting e-bikes into the city soon. We're working on mobility hubs, working closely with the university to see what a mobility hub might be like in the future, where you'll pick up an e-scooter or a bike, you'll be able to charge a car, you'll be able to get the bus, and how we work together and do things like you'll have an app for that and can, you know, manage your transport and some of those more you know, the future of transport rather than just the hard infrastructure.
We did do a pilot with e-bikes, which wasn't very successful.
We did. Yeah.
Why are we bringing them back again? Because in Nottingham, even their project has failed. So isn't that giving us a direction that, you know, it's going to be a huge problem?
Well, e-bikes are very much here, and you know, there's quite a lot of people out there using them. It's a really good way to get people using a bike. So I think there's a lot of that I still think it's a really good scheme. We have taken all the learning we had from that original Derby scheme into this scheme. Trust me, it will not be like the old scheme, and the technology has moved on massively. So, you know, the bikes can now be controlled by GPS. You can get it to stop and slow down. It can't work out of certain areas of the city. We can manage the speed of which you manage those bikes, just like the e-scooters are. We have really worked hard with our colleagues in Nottingham to get this over the line, to make sure that the Derby scheme fits for Derby. And what the operator will do is their approach is that they will build slowly So they won't go, woomph, here are all your e-bikes in the city, send all of the city. They will work with the community in communities and then slowly grow that out. And we absolutely wanted that for Derby. Ask the same provider. We do have a different approach in the city because of the things we've experienced. So I'm very hopeful that this is going to be a great scheme and make a massive difference.
How many of our yellow scooters are still around and active at the moment? Are any of them active now?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So we had about 50 overall. So I appreciate you'll go to Nottingham and see them all over the place. We didn't, again, because of the experience we had with the e-bikes, we didn't want to take that approach in Derby. We very much focused it around longer term hire. We focused it because of COVID at the time on key workers. We're expanding that a little bit because we have seen numbers drop as people are coming back to work and doing different things. But again, we're again linked with when the e-bike scheme comes in. I think we can then have another launch and a push for those for the e-bike e-scooters. But and government have extended the trial on those again because again, those are the only ones that are legal on the roads at the moment.
I think that was you've just pointed in the direction of my next question, really, if I'm honest. You know, we are seeing a lot more illegal scooters on the roads. And we have challenges as councillors constantly of people saying, you know, it's dangerous, it's an accident waiting to happen, what are we doing about it? And then we have the other side of it, people saying, but why can't we use it? It's no worse than kids going out on a bike. They just get from A to B quicker. And I've seen some really good examples of people using them, but I've also seen some very bad examples of people using them. And I suppose the legislation isn't there at the moment, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm sure that, you know, from your perspective, you can probably give us a bit more detail. Where do we sit as a city in that legislation, and what is our enforcement policy? Because is it our PPOs that are enforcing this? Is it our local police? Is there legalities that we can chase on it? Because I think it is important for the safety of the people on the bikes, scooters, and the pedestrians, that it's tackled effectively, and that we don't wait for a problem to occur, as people often challenge me with. I'm sure many of the other councillors in the room.
Yeah, and the enforcement is with the police. So they are the people who can stop people and challenge them when they're on an e-scooter. So again, it's very difficult, and I totally understand your frustrations. But it does feel like, to some extent, the cat's out of the bag with e-scooters, and we're all waiting for the legislation to catch up with something that's just happening naturally, if you like. But at the moment, yeah, the enforcement lies with the police. So it's reporting it to them, focusing on where there are areas where, you know, again, informed by PPOs, by yourselves, by that neighbourhood eyes and ears that we're reliant on, really. Yeah, ideal.
I mean, I think it's the way forward. Obviously, less cars on the road, more electric power is a positive. It's just a sensible approach to it, and making sure that, you know, if certain age groups are using them, that they're getting the road safety awareness that they need to be able to function properly on it. You wanted to comment?
Yeah, very quickly, Chair. I mean, Catherine, I know, you know, our city centre is not as big as you know, some other, but where possible, can we put markings down for, you know, these e-scooters? I mean, as Nicola said, you know, there are some very considered users of these, and there are some very inconsiderate users, and people can get hurt by, you know, sort of these e-scooters running around in St. Peter's Street and Spot, Irongate, etc. Would it be possible to have some lane markings of some kind for these, you know, in the sort of not too distant future?
I mean, it depends. Do you mean in lane markings?
Where possible. I don't mean in every street, but I mean, just like we have in some instances, you know, sort of bicycle lanes that are marked. If we could have, where possible, say in East Street or Albion Street or on the Spot, you know, just for people to walk along safely without some, you know, idiot banging into them on one of these. And it doesn't have to be people that necessarily use the ones that we provide. It's other, you know, children sort of, you know, going around there. So if there was some marking and with enforcement, maybe we can make it a lot safer for people to sort of walk as well as have these.
I think we're going to just coming back on that and picking up on what you said earlier. They are actually still illegal.
Yeah.
So if we make areas for this, we're encouraging something that is illegal.
No,
I think
if we're
that's-
providing them, like, you know,
But for the
Yeah.
ones we use in the city, they would use the already bike routes, wouldn't
Yeah,
they? That's
cycle
the-
lanes, yeah.
cycle lanes
Yeah.
and things that
Yeah.
are through the city. The issue that we have is finding that balance between it. And I think I genuinely think that in another 10 years' time there will be lanes for these things. But right now, until legislation comes in that allows this to be a legal thing, I think you're finding that balance potentially quite difficult.
Yeah.
Any other response on that?
Tina, I'm just pausing our mobility programme because we'll move on to other projects next, but if there's no
Yeah.
more.
Are there any other questions?
No. Okay, so quick update, and there's clearly links with John's presentation earlier and some of the themes that Werner's drawn out, but just to give you an update, really kind of real time of where progress has got to on these schemes. So the Beckettwell Performance Venue, you'll know if you've walked around that part of the city, the buildings have disappeared that were there previously. Demolition is complete. We are about to sign off the final stage of design, REBA stage 4, and then beyond that, it's getting into contract, which is obviously our partner SJS. They are contracting with a building firm to actually construct this. That's due to happen in the next few weeks. Then construction starts, and a couple of years hence, we will have a new performance venue in the city. And just to mention again, TV will be turned off in. Oh right. Just to mention again, I think I've referenced this in previous committee meetings, but let's not forget who we have operating this venue for us. We've secured ASM Global, who you tell by their name, they operate venues across the country and across the world. And firstly, that brings with it significant resource and access to a real breadth of events. But also their particular business plan for this venue is such that it's not just about the nighttime economy and the evening events. It's about the daytime business tourism and conferencing as well. That's really, really, really important to their business plan, but also really important for the city centre because it's both daytime and nighttime footfall spread throughout the week rather than just the descent for the pop concert and then back out again. So that's really important. On the market hall, we're moving into the kind of second phase of the project now. So phase 1 was all focused, as I'm sure you're aware, on the fabric of the building. And last time I came to this committee, I think, or it may have been communities, Caroline Allen at the time was updating on that kind of phase 1 project. That is all complete now. So the external of the building is finished, and obviously the roof looks fantastic, all secure, etc. So we're moving to focus on the interior now and progressing final stages of design to enable that to happen. But the other thing I'll mention, because obviously the building is massively important because it's such an important heritage asset to those themes earlier that Werner alluded to. But the project sponsor for this is now Rachel North. So that's been a recent change to reflect the fact that we're moving into a different stage of the project now that is about the regeneration impact of this market hall, because it is no longer going to be a traditional market hall. It clearly will have elements of trade within it, but it is very much a destination that will attract a different demographic of people, a different audience, operate in a different way to really become a kind of draw for that footfall. So we want to see, you know, the heat map that John showed earlier really changing, so the market hall becomes a destination, and we're leveraging it as much expertise and support as we can to make this really, really successful. And again, all of the kind of demographic picture that John alluded to earlier, we know that Derbyans are draw, we know they have a particular quality offer, but we want to be able to offer something that's complementary to that in another part of the city centre that very much speaks to Derby's identity and Derby's kind of unique selling points, both in terms of the building itself, but also the traders and the businesses within it. And we're looking at the role that creative industries can have to play in that as well, which is really interesting. And then the university we've mentioned already. This is very near completion. So investment in the Condor, which is the Beckettwell private rented scheme, about to be completed within the next month or two, and the public square that sits adjacent to it. Again, Granger, national investor in private rented sector, was the first investor to really kind of put their vote of confidence in the city. And also it's the first example of this particular type of accommodation, this particular product in Derby as well. So that's 260 apartments about to go live in the next couple of months. And we have been working really hard with partners, again, with Marketing Derby and others, to make sure we really push how high quality and exciting this development's going to be for the city, to make sure it's a success.
Long-term renting, as in a contracted, or is it the Airbnb type?
No, it's residential renting rather than short-term stays. The difference with Granger as well is they invest and manage, so they're not purely an investor. They actually have an interest in ensuring the building is, you know, consistently occupied and well looked after, because they have a long-term interest in the development. So it is going to push the boundaries for Derby in terms of you know, price points and quality, but that's a good thing, because we need to be raising the bar, I think, for the city.
As we saw in Mr. Hawkins' earlier presentation, there is a high-end number of people on the high earners, and if there is a city centre location for that, then that can only be a positive, can't it?
I mean, Ian will have a view on this, but as part of the mix, clearly this isn't all we want to see, but it is an important part of the mix to really ensure that we capture that wealth of those working in the Rolls-Royces and the Toyotas to actually live and then therefore invest and spend in the city. And then the final, TV's gone on. The final, I'll start talking because I know we're probably running over time, but today was a really big day for the Our City, Our River project, actually, because the planning application is now live for Derby Riverside, which is a stretch of flood defence that completes package 2 on the opposite side of the river to the council house. So thank you, Lindsay. So all of the documents and imagery is online now, available to view. And in fact, we had a briefing with press media colleagues earlier and shared some of the before and after imagery that really shows what this is going to mean for that part of the city centre. So we're also going to Cabinet next week to get some further approvals to enable us to continue delivery of this, just from a governance perspective. And there's a couple of things I'll say around Derby Riverside. Firstly, the image you see is the concept plan that sits around the flood defence itself. We've had to evidence to our planning colleagues exactly what our wider vision for the area is. We currently have funding for delivery of the flood wall only, but clearly we've got a much bigger ambition for that part of the city centre in terms of a residential-led regeneration scheme. But the role of green and blue within it is massive, because you'll see from the before and after imagery, just Ochre in and of itself reopens our access to and enjoyment of the river, because there will be more green space and better managed landscaping created as a result of this phase of work. And the other key thing to say is obviously there will be a number of office blocks lost to this scheme, because they are at flood risk at the moment, and we made a call some years ago that we would make space for water and create a green space on Stewart Street, where there's currently four office blocks. That in some ways, again, is, you might say, slightly counterintuitive, because we've been talking about how important jobs are, and they absolutely are. But as we've said in the Cabinet paper, and we were talking about early today, we have been working hard with the occupiers and owners of those properties to make sure that we can look at every opportunity we can for them to relocate and support them as we move forward with delivery. And this is an example to Councillor Pandy's question earlier, where the Environment Agency, as a key strategic partner, has invested heavily in helping make this happen. So new opportunities quickly. Derby is one of the stations in the HS2 growth strategy for the East Midlands. And what this means is that obviously we won't have high-speed rail to Derby, but high-speed trains will be able to travel to Derby on the existing line. So it will be part of the network, essentially. I think I've reflected that correctly, haven't I? And what this has leveraged, I'll try and be quick on this, is a really interesting partnership with both the East Midlands Development Company, who have funding from the government to develop real regeneration plans around stations on the back of HS2, but also locally, London and Continental Railways, who are an arm of the Department for Transport. They own a lot of properties in Derby, and they run, for example, the Rail Technical Centre on London Road. They manage that. And they also want to support us because that's part of their remit to invest and regenerate station areas. So really good timing, because obviously we're awaiting our bid for Great British Railways, and we've already recognised that part of the conversation really highlighted this part of the city as somewhere we needed to improve. So we've been to Cabinet recently to outline the plans for working together in that way, and we've got a number of heritage assets that we really want to kind of safeguard and showcase as part of that plan. The one in the bottom right is Midland House, and we're supporting London and Continental Railways to acquire that, which is really significant because it's currently owned by the Department for Education, I think, and they were looking to dispose of it. And we wanted to really kind of capture that as a real key asset, because control is everything. It's really, really, really important, because again, to have a plan is one thing, but to be able to deliver it is another, and land ownership and land control is really critical in that. So, and that's just the plan that we're looking at with them to create a regeneration master plan, and that's Midland House, as I've said, that we're looking to acquire. So my final few slides are on the assembly rooms and Guildhall, that I know were specific updates that this committee asked for. And this image really just represents why we're doing this. Cities, as we've said a lot this evening, city centres are no longer retail driven. We need to create reasons for people to choose to come and visit. And culture is really at the heart of our plans for city centre regeneration. So Project Assemble is a project that we've been working on for some time now with our key partners of Derby Theatre and the University of Derby. I just want to quickly outline where we've got to with that. There's a number of objectives we've got here. The first objective, and the reason for me putting the Derby Theatre image up, is we have a nationally acclaimed theatre organisation in the city that is one of the Arts Council's funded organisations. It's very innovative and trailblazing in how it operates, but it also creates a lot of learning outcomes and community benefits as well through what they do. But their location that you see here is constrained in that they can't grow where they are, and it's also not necessarily the optimum space to really showcase what they do and have the greatest regeneration benefits. So we've been looking at the feasibility of relocating Derby Theatre, who are obviously wholly owned by the University of Derby, hence the learning outcomes and connections, to the assembly room site, which is the second key objective, to bring forward a key anchor use for the assembly room site. Now, obviously, that's the image as is. The theatre proposal would occupy part of this site, and obviously what we know is, from a planning perspective, we need to look at a wider comprehensive regeneration plan to make sure that we deliver this in a holistic way and a managed way. So I'll touch on that a little bit later on as well, but bringing forward a use to this part of the city centre is obviously critical, and many of you will have seen the images that have emerged from the first stage feasibility study we've completed for that, which would create a larger auditorium, but also a lot better ancillary space as well for the theatre and the university to use. So positive updates. Obviously, we have recently heard that we've secured £20 million of levelling up fund towards the project. And where we are right now is we're currently waiting for the detailed terms of that funding in a memorandum of understanding from the levelling up department. And we're in dialogue with DLUC at the moment to work through the details of that in terms of spend profile and delivery timescales. There's obviously been a delay already to the announcement of levelling up, so we need to work that through in terms of the project programme. And also, on the back of the levelling up announcement, there's been really positive reinforcement from our partners about how they want to work with us in bringing forward a scheme that can be delivered in the timescales we need to, and with the funding we have. But then also, in terms of just a quick update on what's happening now in readiness for what might come later, pre-demolition works. We've got contractors about to start just to help prepare the building for demolition, and we've got the Luff announcement. We've expanded that package of works to include more soft strips and asbestos removal, and that will then lead us to a clearer demolition strategy and approach for when we're ready to do that on the back of a planning consent. And then finally on the Guildhall, I've asked relevant colleagues to provide an update on that, and we have undertaken some essential repairs. They've been completed, but to reopen to an acceptable safety and customer experience standard, we would need to undertake further work. So options being looked at the moment, how we can bring that building back into use and the costs associated with that. But just to reinforce, this is obviously a really important heritage asset in a really important part of the city centre. And then finally, just to move on to the developer partner procurement that I referenced earlier, we have approval to go ahead with that now. And this is really important because we want it to bring more innovation, more capacity and more investment from the private sector to work on a number of key opportunities in the city in a different way to really help us make a step change in regeneration. So that's my slides. Thank you.
Questions from the floor?
Thanks, Chair. Thank you. It's really good to see some of the future plans from the last time you spoke to us, which I think was the beginning of last year. Obviously, some slower than others, but forget that COVID was still a huge part of some of that. So the OCOR planning application, does that still feature the demolition of the extra house flats?
It does not any longer, no.
Superb.
So that is a key change that we've made based on flood modelling we've done and revised, obviously, planning of the flood wall alignment. So basically on the imagery that I referenced, Councillor West, you'll see there's essentially a glazed wall proposed to go around the perimeter of Exeter House to obviously make sure that's on the dry side of the flood defence and it's protected. And obviously that's really critical for Derby Homes colleagues who manage that facility, because it means that they're able to think differently now about the use and the investment and the future for that property. So yeah, and it makes sense because it's obviously a really beautiful location, so it makes sense where we've got residential accommodation already that we can support, and we want to do so. So yeah, that's changed.
So that was floated as sort of phase 3 when phase 1 came through as a planning, and I said I'm quite happy with phase 1 and 2, but I can't support phase 3. So that. The other thing then is just about Derby Theatre. So obviously I think they're looking at outline planning permission coming to us in April. That's the hope, isn't it? My concerns for that, which obviously are linked here, is the agreement to any outline planning permission ending Derby Theatre moving, but obviously there's a lot of jigsaw sliding block puzzle pieces in place to make sure that Derby Theatre can move into the assembly room site, and obviously there's a lot of conditions to that being demolished and actually having a concrete plan for that site, and that's the only way that will get demolition looked at. Do we know sort of timescales for that whole project?
So I think you're referring, Councillor West, to the wider Derby and master plan that's submitted for outline planning and the proposed. Obviously, I haven't referenced that in this presentation, particularly because we were focused on those schemes the council's involved in directly. But yes, in terms of timescales, obviously the Luff funding focuses our minds because there is a specific timescale for delivery of spend on that, and those are the conversations we're having at the moment with government around what that spend profile might look like given the delays to the announcement, etc. So the exact kind of milestones to delivery, we don't have a detailed programme yet for actually starting on site, etc. But we know that we've got a broad timescale to spend Luff by March 2026, a certain level of that spend by March 2026. So that needs to be part of the programming that we look at. And obviously another part of the conversation we're having the university and the theatre now is not only the shape of the building itself, but the terms on which they'll occupy that and the relationship they'll have with the council as part of that project. So that's all kind of on the back of the Love announcement, really, to really focus attention.
Sorry, if you don't mind.
No,
Is there, obviously we've seen the university investing in their business school, which is their land, their building. Is there any sign they want to invest in this from an ownership level, or is it just that they want to utilise it as a potential location?
Well, Love was available for local authorities to bid for, so obviously the councils had to bid for that funding and therefore would be the accountable body for that funding. And currently the proposal would be for the council to construct and own that asset and essentially lease to our partners. Obviously the university's contribution exists already and would continue through because they are supporting the theatre at the moment with revenue funding as opposed to the capital funding that we're talking about. So that their commitment to the project is through the operational side. Yeah. Which, well, when the university first took on the theatre previously, it was in that context, and they've supported the theatre year on year since in terms of its operation. So that's all in the mix in the discussions that we're having.
it's all right. The only other thing was then just about the Guildhall Theatre. So you said the options were being looked at to bring the space back into use.
Yeah.
I just wondered, do we know what the options are? But I suppose realistically, how much might we be looking at having to spend to bring it back into use? Are there any options for applying for any funding specifically for that? Do we have any timescales? Because this is something that I've asked about year on year and we're no further forward.
I appreciate that, and obviously the update I brought doesn't go into a level of detail that I'm sure you were hoping for in terms of timescales and numbers, and that isn't in place at the moment, if in all honesty, in terms of costs and timescales. I guess external funding wise, the advantage of the Guildhall's location and nature is that it's listed, and therefore that opens opportunities for different funding in terms of the heritage world, if you like. And historic England, but also, brings with it certain other challenges. But Historic England have been really heavily involved in all the work we've done around the Cultural Heart Master Plan. So they are very much engaged and supportive of work in that part of the city centre. In terms of the options that are being looked at, I guess what I mean by options is how that building might be used, because clearly it was used as a community theatre and that is still an option, but could there be other ways in which that space is used differently? And there's other examples that I know colleagues have been to see in other parts of the country of similar facilities that they've been used in slightly different ways. Creative industries, maybe other options. So I'm afraid that's all I can share now. But yeah. And obviously, what's to the excellent thing. I think. Have you got any other?
No, thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. I just think on that point, I do think that we've had to hear some fantastic variations of lots of things happening in the city right now, and I appreciate from your perspective the pressures that we have as a council and the measures that are in place and the future budget restraints that we have. We have to prioritise, don't we? And as much as we would love to do all of these projects right now, today, tomorrow, and get everything done, I think, as we've seen the levelling up funding, sometimes these things push us in a slightly different direction at different times, and I think it's always an important element to have those things in the back burner as our next steps. It's a plan that I'm sure you've said to me many times before, Catherine, it's certainly not a 1 year plan. It could be a 5 to 10 year plan, but more likely to a 20 to 30 year plan, and that the city will be here long after we are all left, and it's the future element, isn't it, that we've got to consider. So
I was just thinking about the not that I'm here to drum up business to connect, but the offices that are going on Stewart Street, maybe I can help rehouse some of the businesses into connect. So maybe have a separate conversation.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Networking already. Some of the partnership approaches have been fantastic, and seeing that work with Marketing Derby and other key players in the city is it's really good to hear. So any other questions for Catherine? Anyone? No? Lovely, thank you for that update. Really promising, exciting things happening in Derby. Thank you. Again, feel
Great, hey, councillor, for leave at this point.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Sorry, Anne. Okay. Stay for yours. Mine's got no photographs and no colours in it. Quite dull.
That's nothing to do.
It's nowhere near as vibrant as John's or Catherine's. And it's on the council template.
Go for it then.
Share that screen.
This is our item 7 Connect Derby.
No. But that's the only one you're going to get to see, Nicola. There's no other picture.
That's a pretty exciting picture there, isn't it?
Right, yes, it is. So I was asked to give a bit of an update on the Rolls-Royce Submarines Nuclear Skills Academy at the iHub, and just to give an update on what's happened to the businesses there, where they've relocated to, and how the handover is going with the University of Derby. So what's happened?
Just pressing.
Hello?
It's a bit of tech.
It's lovely to see the
Yes, yeah.
okay, right. Why is it not? I don't know what's happening.
Someone hacked in the system.
See, all the techie stuff worked.
Apart from yours.
Oh, John, I did all the John stuff from him.
Useful.
Oh, there you go. It's working. And the sound.
Silent in your voice.
It is. It was.
Let's go for it.
Okay, so the Nuclear Skills Academy was announced back in May 2022. It's the first of its kind, and it aims to sustain nuclear capability within the UK submarines programme. It's creating a dedicated pipeline of talent at the start of their careers, and we're hoping to put through 200 apprentices per annum for the next 10 years, hopefully creating about 2,000 jobs in that specific sector. It's a new sector that's a growth sector, and everyone's quite really investing in it. It's a strategic partnership approach, so the key players are Derby City Council, Rolls-Royce Submarines Limited, the University of Derby and NMARC. What was our role? So the City Council, we had to provide a home for the NSA, which is the iHub up at Infinity Park. We had to consult and explain the vision and strategic outcomes to the existing businesses at the iHub, reassure the businesses that the NSA would not be detrimental to their business, and to collaboratively work together to find an alternative fit for purpose locations to rehouse them, basically. So we had 23 businesses based at the iHub. Six businesses had offices, but they had multiple offices within the iHub. 7 had workshops, and again, multiple workshops. And then we had about 10 virtual co-working and hot testing type facilities in there. Of those, in terms of relocation options, the virtual co-working businesses, we offered alternative Connect Derby business addresses and moved them across almost within a fortnight of the project being announced. They've moved across. It was really easy to do. From the 6 office businesses, 2 relocated to Marble Hall. So we tried to put as many within the Connect portfolio. So 2 relocated to Marble Hall in July 2022, 1 relocated to Saddlebridge Studios, 1 relocated to Rolls-Royce site because they are a large client of Rolls-Royce and they wanted to work closely with them. So they were adamant that's where they wanted to go if we were going to come out the iHub. 2 did not take up relocation options and left altogether, but they were 2 quite large organisations that had been impacted by COVID. So if this had not happened, they would have still left because they were re-looking at how to downsize their business operations and kind of work slightly differently. So they left altogether. In terms of the workshop businesses, 1 relocated to Saddlebridge Studios because they're a very clean space, and the extent of their workshop was a device that's as big as one of our printers, and that was it. So we managed to find them a ground floor studio at Saddlebridge Studios, and 1 relocated to the University of Derby, so they helped accommodate them. We've got 5 currently at the iHub, which we're moving out. So we've got a target deadline for the 31st of March to fully vacate the iHub and hand over to the University of Derby. So 3 are moving to Dunstall Road newly developed units by March 23. That's what I'm working on closely at the minute because it's quite tight. So 1 is moving to their own buildings. That's the NMARC. So they're moving down the road, and 1 is completely relocated to London. This particular tenant had already handed their notice in before we even announced the Nuka Skills Academy. He gave us a year's notice because that was the direction his investors wanted him to go anyway. So he's going to London. My final slide, handover. We planned it in 2 phases. The office side was vacated by July 2022. So we had the office side handed over to the University of Derby. They took it on a tenancy will and they commenced their alterations. It was slight. They knocked out a couple of walls, they rejigged some areas, and they started operating as academies from September 2022. So they brought in about 60 to 80 of the apprentices, and the rest they had working from other sites waiting for the whole building to be vacated so they could start in September. The phase 2 side, the workshop side, which is still currently in our ownership, so we're really collaborative with the university. They have the front half of the building, we have the second half of the building. They did pinch one of my staff and employed her. But I know they offered her more money, so she's got, but it's in good hands. So we work really well. We've got a joining office, so we come out, walk through and kind of mingle in the middle. So that's worked really well. The university is going to commence their alterations work to the workshop side from April 23. So we've got a really tight deadline to get out so they can bring their contractors in, and they'll bring their new intake of apprentices from September 23. Yes.
Usually apprentices are taken by the colleges. So how come university is setting up?
I think we. There you go.
2 levels. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Sorry, I apologise for answering.
I'm glad you answered it because I don't understand the education, but I know that the college didn't come, but the university have done something, and they keep mentioning these T's and stuff in the agreement.
Next level.
It's the next level effectively. So for example, I did an apprenticeship from 16 to 19, but now these are sort of the apprenticeships are starting from 18, sort of post college.
Yeah.
Sounds really good. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, that's all right. So in terms of handover, so Connect Derby, we're working with the University of Derby's facilities management team, and we're handing over the FM side. So we're looking at stuff like the utilities, looking at grounds maintenance, looking at all the compliance checks they've got to do, because we're still going to be the landlord. So we will be going and inspecting what they do on a regular basis and making sure they're accurately recording all the results. So from a health and safety perspective, the assets protected, that they're operating safely. So we will be doing that work with the university as long as they have the lease. The estates team are working with the university to agree the main lease. So they're currently on a tenancy at will, and we're finalising all the main lease details. They're looking to take on I think a 13-year lease with us. And the estates team will lead that. I feed into that along with the property maintenance team. And then we've got property maintenance, and what they're doing is the university, every time they submit alterations to our beautiful building, they check all the plans, they check all the compliance, the statutory, the legislative, and make sure it's done up to British standards, and make sure it's safe. And then they sign it off, and then the university can commence and do their works from it. So that's where we are. It's going really well. It's extremely stressful. The tenants are like 2-year-olds who see us so needy at the minute, but it's such an amazing project. And I'll be honest with you, the tenants did not complain. Do you know when the vision was portrayed to them and sold to them, they were instant, yes, as long as it's not detrimental to us, we will work with you hand in hand. And as you can see, there's been no negative publicity around this at all. No one screamed that, oh, this is happening to me. They've worked with us every step of the way because they wanted something amazing for Derby, and they saw this opportunity. So yeah, it's been really good. Stressful but good.
Fantastic. And as I know you quite well in the past, Dan, you are amazing at negotiating with these individuals and working really well, and putting them at ease and letting them know. So really good work. Is there any questions?
Thank you.
Hi.
How much has it cost to relocate the businesses?
I wasn't asked to bring any finance information with me, so I can take that away and come back to you, Joanna.
That would be super. Yeah. And the other thing was, because I know we were very keen to see a bus in place when the iHub opened, 6 years ago?
Yeah.
And that the bus stops and everything were put in place But that Rolls-Royce weren't able to do that because of security issues and sort of anybody getting on the bus that was then going to Rolls-Royce nights. Is there any sort of travel plan been put in place for either a bus to go up there from the city centre, if there's going to be a huge number of apprentices?
I think the
next 10 years.
Yeah, I think the University of Rolls-Royce are exploring that option now, and I think obviously Rolls-Royce didn't do it for the security purposes, but they are trying to work with other providers to see if they get something there. But their issue is, unless there's other developments that might require the public transport to there, they're finding it quite hard to do. And to be honest, those kind of discussions are happening at steering and project group, which I don't attend. My job was the delivery side of stuff. So I can find out more information, Councillor West, and come back to you on that one. But I know they were exploring a public transport option to the side. But I think when they get the volume, because at some point they're looking to take in 200 apprentices a year, but and it's like a 2.5 year program or 3 years. So at some point they'll have 600 apprentices. So that gives them the footfall to actually get public transport and a viable option for someone to take that on. But I'll get some more details and come back to you.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Any other questions, Councillor West? No. Thank you. Thank you for that update, and as always, you're massively on the ball and know the ins and outs. So thank you very much. Right, I think we've got our good friend, Mr. Fullager, who loves to be at our meetings. He's here at every single meeting.
I specifically,
I'm sure.
specifically asked Lindsay to put me on last because I enjoy all the other presentations.
Thank you for being so patient, Ian.
Not at all. Thank you.
Item 8 is our private sector housing strategy and IMO update.
Yes, thank you very much, Jim. So in terms of the update tonight, I wanted to concentrate very much on a small number of absolutely key changes that are happening, key issues that are arising in relation to our privately owned and our privately rented accommodation in the city. And we touched on some of the very high-end new privately rented accommodation that's been provided in the city centre. I'm now going to take us to the other end of some of the accommodation that exists in the city. So I'm going to first of all talk briefly about a stock condition survey that we've had commissioned and reported back in relation to private rented stock. Secondly, I will talk briefly about the health impacts of housing conditions, whether they're privately rented or whether they're privately owned. And then thirdly, I just wanted to bring up in relation to supported exempt accommodation and how that's changing in the city, the impacts on tenants and the council. And then we can quickly look at the next steps, and obviously yourselves will comment as to whether you think that's appropriate.
Sorry, can I be excused?
Absolutely.
Sorry,
Ian. Time.
Thank you. I won't go through a lot of the detail on the slide, but I would just draw your attention to the middle box. And that just makes the point that private rented in the city is growing quickly, and it's growing more quickly than the national average. It's risen, you can see there, from 17% to almost 25% in a 10-year span. And in terms of where that private rented accommodation is found, you can see in the bar chart bottom right, the tall blue block is the highest levels of private rented accommodation. That is found in the most deprived wards of our city. And you can see at the other end, the most affluent, if you like, or the least deprived. Those wards typically have the highest amount of owner occupation and the lowest levels of private rented accommodation. And then the coloured map of the city, you'll all be familiar with that. The red, the dark red there, shows the indices of multiple deprivation. I'll just ask you to hold that in your mind. You can see that swathe coming up from Sinfin up into the city centre and then going out a bit towards Mackworth as well as some of the poorest areas of the city. And if we look then on this slide, this shows us where some of the poorest housing is in terms of non-decency. And as you'll be familiar, the Decent Home Standard has been in the social housing side for a couple of decades now, and it looks at things like the age that bathrooms and kitchens have been replaced. It looks at average room sizes and do they meet reasonable national standards, those sorts of things. The stock condition survey that we had done in the city, it wasn't big enough to go out and consider large numbers of stocks, and we've had to forecast the findings. But the forecast of those findings indicate that in Normanton, 50% of the private rented accommodation wouldn't meet the Decent Home Standard, and you can see similar tales for Abbey, Arlington, and Mackworth there as well. Large percentages not meeting the Decent Home Standard in terms of private rented accommodation.
So how are they getting away with it?
Currently, there isn't a national legislation in place, and it's down for each individual local authority to have a private sector enforcement team, which we do have, and that team is very active. It's got a massive caseload. When they find those poor conditions, they will address them, and it could be initially working in partnership with the landlord to sort of educate them and explain what good looks like, and get them through persuasion to improve those conditions. Where they find severe problems, then they will enforce, serve notice if necessary. The ultimate sanction is that they can prosecute landlords, they can serve a prohibition notice, shut a property down. That's quite extreme, doesn't happen very often. It does happen. And you can see my my laptop's frozen.
My question.
There's handouts here. That's
Right. Yeah, you can't share it. 'Cause-
no, I can't do
Okay.
anything.
Just try that again. Let's see.
It's all right.
Okay.
Great.
Let's keep going. So this next slide then, it's a similar theme, but this relates to the health and housing rating system. It's a nationally acknowledged rating system. And this slide talks about category 1 hazards. So category 1 hazards are those hazards that are so bad they present an immediate and imminent threat to the homeowner's health and well-being. So we're not talking about little bits of damp. We are talking about damp and mold that is so significant, it is very likely to cause a significant health issue in the future. It's about electrical hazards that present an immediate threat to your safety of electrocution. The stock survey that we did, again, has forecast where these issues exist and the scale of them. And you can see there, almost 6% of our private rented homes across the city have an excess cold hazard. So that obviously relates to damp and mold, and the tragic case that was in the news a couple of months ago is a tragic example of that. And you can see that there's other larger numbers of trips and falls hazards, fire hazards, and the like. High levels of category 1 hazards within the city. And then this is what that means in reality. And these are all pretty recent photos. If I'm honest, the one on the left, that I know is from a couple of years ago, but again, in Derby in 2020, as that happened, we don't want to find children's beds breathing in all of that mold that is 3 foot above their faces. The next photo is one of a bathroom. This was from November, I think, last year, so very current. And I've seen pictures of the rest of the house, and the living room wall is very similar, just covered in mold. I know that there's 2 children living in that house. I'll skip the hoarding one, but you can see the photo before that of a lot of mold. Hoarding is a big issue that we come across. But I'll move on to the electrical sockets. That house had so many hazards that the manager of the enforcement team went out and visited that. She was so concerned about his safety that she put him in her car and she drove him to the housing option centre to make sure that he was rehoused that day. She was that concerned. And you can just see, you know, the socket has caught on fire. It had a fire. The landlord hasn't done anything about it, so the poor gentleman who lived in that house was forced to use the other side. So how long would that take before there was a more significant fire? And then the last picture on the right hand side, you can see there's no handrail, there's no safety bars to the side of those stairs. 3 young children under 5 in that house, and the stairs went up onto the next level as well with no safety bars. So again, it was, I think, in my opinion, just a matter of time. It fell over those stairs. So that is what we are finding in Derby right here, right now. This next bit relates to a study that colleagues in public health have done for us, and it looks at the impact of those poor conditions on the tenants and residents who live there. And this particular study isn't related just to private rented accommodation, it relates to privately owned homes as well. I always find this quite shocking. The lines there are talking about life expectancy. You've got females at the top, as you can see nationally, which is the red line there, and across the East Midlands, which is the orange line. You can see that life expectancy in the country has stalled, actually started to decline slightly. What I think is shocking for us is the green line is Derby, and you can see life expectancy in Derby is declining significantly. And that is even more acute in the box underneath, which is for men. Again, you can see men life expectancy is declining quickly. These figures were taken before COVID, so there's nothing funny COVID related going on to it. That is up until 2020, what was happening in terms of life expectancy in the city.
Are you going to go on to the potentials?
Yeah, I won't go into a lot of detail, but we will look at some of those issues a bit further. The bar chart on the left, so the pink and the green, is Derby, and it makes the point life expectancy in the most deprived wards. So if you can think back to that original map, you've got Sinn Féin running up through into the city centre, out into Mackworth. In those wards, life expectancy of men and women is around about 10 years less than life expectancy of people living in the most affluent wards of the city. It's the gap that we've talked about for a number of years that we need to be closing the gap. The second, the blue slides, is healthy life expectancy. And what that is showing us is when poor health, significant poor health, starts to affect people. And I'm talking about life-changing conditions that begin to significantly impact on ability to live a normal life. This is a national set of stats. I'm assured by our public health colleagues the set for Derby would follow the same trajectory. But again, it shows that those people living in the most deprived parts of the country will fall into poor health almost 20 years earlier than those people living in the most affluent parts of the country. And you can see just about there. There's a dotted line. It's a dotted red line. That is the age, it's the pensionable age. So you can see that the majority of the population are falling into poor health before they reach pension. And I'm not going to go through all of this in any great detail, but the bar charts top right there relates to emergency hospital admissions for COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And the point there is that if you live in Derwent, you are 5 times more likely to be admitted to hospital as an emergency with COPD than if you live in Aylesford. And the set of bar charts below that, it's a similar picture, and it's people who are dying from respiratory diseases. And again, it's making the point that people who are living in the most deprived wards are 3 times more likely to die from a respiratory disease than those people living in Stafford Park.
It's interesting on there because Derwent and Chaddeston are so close demographically, but so far apart in the numbers there in terms of, you know, as we know, Derwent will shortly be Derby, Chaddeston, east, west, north, whichever way it is. But they are so close yet so far apart,
Yeah,
which is quite an interesting.
absolutely. And I think the thrust of this presentation is saying, well, certainly, I suppose, in terms of the other suburb, which is, of course, is Oakwood, which is very close as well, is saying that the Oakwood houses, as we all know, are so much newer, aren't they? The last 25, 30 years old.
There's so many factors, aren't there?
Yeah,
one on.
absolutely. Absolutely.
To be considered.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, my laptop is frozen again.
It's that excess cold. Yeah.
It's very cold this week as well. We're going to get some terribly
But
cold.
while your laptop was frozen, what do we do about it?
That's the answer.
Yeah. See. Clays balls. Okay. The last slide relates to trips and falls, and this is a slightly different picture, as you can see, and it makes the point that people at risk, significant risk of trips and falls, it's more widely spread across the city, and we're all most concerned that you know the age of 65, someone over the age of 65, statistics tells us a trip or fall is going to have a significant impact on their life. And we know that if someone over the age of 85 breaks a hip through a trip or fall, there's a very high likelihood that they will not be able to return to independent living. And there is quite a high likelihood that tragically they will die within a year of that trip or fall. They break a hip following that fall. This is interesting, and it begins to answer the question you raised. This model is the Building Research Establishment model. It's a nationally accepted model. What our colleagues in public health has done have taken their modelling, and in the first column it tells us the forecast of how many instances we think of those hazards on the far left. So in terms of the top line, our forecasting says that in the city we have 650 cases of significant damp and mould. The cost to rectify all of that, those 650 cases, would be, I can tell you, it's hard to read, but it's £4.8 million. I'll skip the next column, but it is similar and related to the fourth column on there, which is the saving to the NHS. So the model is saying if we could eliminate all of those 651 cases of damp and mould, the saving to the NHS would be £366,000. And you can see that the final column, that would mean that if we did fund that work, that would take 13 years to pay back. And that's quite a long time. And as you all know, damp and mould can be quite expensive to put right, because you can be talking about damp-proof courses or fixing roofs, things that cost a lot of money. If you skip down to the third row, by contrast, again, the research is saying 1,600 cases of risks of falls. Because the risk of fall, sorting out the risk of fall, you're talking about ramps or putting in handrails or just stair risers, that sort of thing. They're much cheaper, smaller jobs. The cost to do that is £1.2 million, and that would pay back in, we've rounded it there, but I can tell you it's 1 year, 1 month. So on the surface, there is a strong case for public sector investment to try and address those issues there. They would pay back very quickly. Now, I've done this presentation to senior people in the NHS and senior people at the hospital, and they said that is great, Ian, it's really helpful. The health warning they've given me, excuse the pun, is that, Ian, if you were to resolve all of the risks of trips and falls, it's unlikely that those hospital beds would sit there empty, because we will always find people to fill those beds, and therefore realising those savings is quite difficult. So I do need to mention it. But certainly, on the face of it, it appears to me that there is a case there for investment to try and tackle some of those issues. Moving on, the other area that I just wanted to mention to yourselves was the growth in supported exempt accommodation. Now, supported exempt accommodation is a type of private rented accommodation. It's exempt from housing benefit caps because the landlord is required to provide support to that accommodation. And if they do provide that support, they can apply for this supported exempt accommodation rate, which enables the landlord then to claim significantly higher housing benefit levels than if it's just an accommodation. And to give you a feel, if a normal house was rented at £100, the supported exempt accommodation rent per week for that house could be something in the order of £250 to £350. So we're talking about that sort of magnitude. It's been around for more than 10 years, supported exempt accommodation, but certainly over the last 3 or 4 years, Derby, along with other major cities, have seen a significant growth in supported exempt accommodation. And that presents a couple of issues, and certainly big cities like Birmingham have done a lot of research into it. And what they have found is that the support that is supposed to be there is not being provided by many landlords, which means then obviously you've got very vulnerable people who aren't getting the support they need. They then may behave in a way that isn't suitable for neighbouring communities, who then have to put up that bad behaviour. And it means that there are potentially fraudulent claims going in there because landlords are claiming for an enhanced level of housing benefit but aren't providing the service that should go with that. So in response to that, in Derby, we put in a bid to government, and we've been awarded just over £500,000 to establish a team to look into all of this. And the multidisciplinary team it will be running within my area, within housing, but we'll have housing standards officers in there, we'll have housing benefits experts in there as well. And the purpose of the team is to first of all create a charter so that we can explain to landlords what we expect in the city. If we're going to pay you this free supported exempt accommodation rate, this is how we expect you to run your property and the support we expect you to provide. The team will also then go and deliver training to landlords some support to help them raise standards where it's necessary and show them, if you like, what good looks like. Then going back to the earlier points, if landlords don't respond positively to that support training, we'll take enforcement action. And that could be either against poor housing standards, or it could be action that you're making fraudulent claims in terms of the housing benefit because you're not putting in support. That team has just been created. It's doing mapping work to try and establish where the supported accommodation is in the city. It's beginning to talk to some of the larger providers. But during the course of next year, it will be rolling out training programs and will begin to actually drive up standards. So that's when it really begin to have effects in the city. And then what next? So I've done a similar presentation to this to senior people, to Cabinet, I should say, in the first instance, to Cabinet colleagues. I've done it to senior people in the hospital, in the NHS, and we are beginning to work better together in terms of seeing health, housing, social care as one coherent system. And certainly through the Health and Wellbeing Board, we're having discussions as to how we can join up to try and tackle some of those issues that result in people going into hospital. Cabinet, just before Christmas, resolved that we should go out and consult landlords and the public and other stakeholders as to whether to introduce selective licensing or additional licensing. Both of those different types of licensing would require landlords with properties in those areas to get them licensed, and would then enable the council officers to ensure that suitable standards are being applied within those homes. Cabinet has also made £500,000 available next year to try and start to tackle some of the issues I talked about. We're in those discussions with health and social care as to how we best spend that money next year to have the biggest effect for that money. And then members will certainly be aware that you've asked the Chief Planning Officer to go away and look into whether Article 4 could be introduced, revoked across parts of the city, and that would obviously then mean that planning permission is required in relation to the establishment of HIMOs within those areas where Article 4 could be revoked. And I know that the Chief Planner is working on that currently, plans to come back to members. And then finally, just to mention, the government are also looking at this at this time. There is a white paper proposed, and that is proposing that a decent home standard is introduced within the private rented sector, as it has been in the social housing sector. We think that would be a significant step forward if that standard became legislated, and therefore we could enforce it more easily. And then there's also a supported housing regulatory bill, which again would require local authorities to take a more strategic view in relation to supported exempt accommodation. We feel we're in a good position in that because the government have already given us the £500,000 to establish the team that I was talking about earlier. But again, if the government does bring that forward, and it is going through the houses at the moment having readings, we think that would be a very positive step as well. So we will stop talk, Chair, but that's what I wanted to bring to you today.
Really, really interesting in terms of all the data and information there. Thank you, Ian. I think it's catered issued, yeah, I'll refer to my colleagues for any other questions.
Yeah, so the Article 4 findings, have we got any? Can we really do something, or with the HMOs, or?
Yeah, so I think there's different tools that are available to us. Article 4 is one of those. The chief planner is looking, and I think taking evidence from members as to how much of a problem we could demonstrate to justify the change to Article 4. But if we were to introduce that change either across the city or perhaps more likely in certain areas where we could prove that there is an issue, it would mean that anybody wanting to create a HIMO would need to get planning permission. And that, for the first time, would enable planners to begin to look at the proximity of other properties. But it's by no means a guarantee that we'd be able to refuse large numbers of HIMOs. Yeah. So that is one route that could have some benefit, but may not be a solution. It's right.
Refused by the Parliament?
Local plan.
Yes, it would be our local plans that we would have to introduce it through. And then, as I was saying, Cabinet have asked us to go and consult in relation to selective licensing and additional licensing. Selective licensing would enable us to draw, in effect, a line on a map where we think that there is a significant issue arising from HIMOs. And within that area, if it would have to go out to consult, and if it was then adopted by the council, it would mean that every HIMO within that area would have to be registered with us. And at the point of registration, the Housing Standards team could go in and check that, one, it's fit from a housing standards point of view, people just aren't living in really bad conditions, and two, that it's well managed as well. So that's quite a powerful tool if we do go down that route. The other tool is additional licensing. And again, sorry, I should have said with selective licensing, it's not just HIMO. Selective licensing would be any rented house. The additional licensing would be specifically for HIMO. So if we had an area on a map that became an additional license, any HIMO within that area would need to be licensed. And again, the Housing Standards team can go and ensure.
That's what Carl meant.
Yeah, thank you. You know, what I'm about to say is no reflection on you in any way because you're not responsible for that side. But quite frankly, when this came out about 6-7 months ago, the alarm bells should have been ringing then, and some effort should have been made towards trying to address the situation. And I've been talking about it for 18 months now, that we need a multifaceted, multi-agency approach to this. Planning, housing, licensing, housing standards, even building reg should come into this and make it so that those developers, genuine developers, investors that want to invest and make money from Derby should be made to feel welcome, but the cowboy operators shouldn't. Now, nothing has really changed in the last 18 months that I've been talking about this, and Councillor Pandey mentioned Article 4. But the resolution was passed in September for something to be done. As yet, nothing has been done. Both myself as chair of planning and the Councillor Jed Potter, vice chair, had a meeting, I think probably December, with Paul Clark, and quite frankly, he said he didn't have the resources to do this. And it was asking individual councillors to sort of give information back. Now, how is an individual councillor of a ward supposed to know where the HMOs are, whether they're licensed or unlicensed or not? Other cities have done this, and they've taken a very pragmatic approach where the planning officers have sent out surveys, conducted surveys, asked for the help of local councillors. Here, local councillors are being asked to go out by themselves to try and gather this information. I've never come across anything like this. This is as if to say, if you let me finish, this is as if to say, well, it's your responsibility, you go and do it. Now, I don't know. It says here there's a figure of 0.5 going to be made available by the cabinet. I don't know when that's going to be made available, or if any of it is going to go towards surveys or sort of move this process of Article 4 now. That a year ago or whatever, I asked for selective licensing to be introduced as well, but nothing has been done. Quite frankly, you know, I think 8-10 years ago, there was a difference lifespan or life expectancy, 7 years between Arboretum and Elliott Street. Today, that's gone up to 11 years. Now, if these planners and people making the decision, if they went and had a look around parts of Arboretum, Normanton, Abbey, Darley, Mackworth, and see what is causing the health issues to these people. It's not just physical, it's their mental well-being as well. If you have 4 or 5 hivos in one street and nobody cares about the presence of the house or whatever, then it's the old adage, you know, if a child if a child is ridiculed every day, when it grows up, they will practice that same on somebody else, and that's what's happening here. You know, nothing has really been done to address this situation. When the survey, I think 10, 12 years ago, you know, when it first came out, that life expectancy between Arboretum and there was, you know, what has happened? If anything, we've made the situation worse. But as I said, this is nothing to do with you. You're just presenting a report as you found it, and I'm very grateful that you have. You know, I have not seen a single process initiated to gather information as to how we can better the lives of our residents in these deprived wards. You know, it's a question of, yes, resolution was passed. What has happened since the resolution? As I said, you know, I chair of planning, I'm a Labour councillor. Jed Potter is vice chair of planning, he's a Conservative councillor. So it's not as if, you know, that we both had a meeting with Paul Clark in December. We had one in November as well. And, you know, quite frankly, he said, well, I don't have the resources.
Councillor Khan, if I can just ask Mr. Bullock has come back on that, because I think what you were presenting to us there prior to that statement is that work, isn't it? It's that preamble to this project that will be happening. So if you can answer.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. So I know that Paul Clark is looking in relation to the Article 4. I think he's keen to receive information from ward councillors. I haven't been closely involved, but I think the logic there is that councillors will be receiving complaints in relation to this, and I think Paul's thinking was, if you are receiving complaints in relation to particular homes, then do let me know, and I can use that information. But I'm sure he'd be pleased to talk to you individually, councillor, or come back to this board if that was found to be appropriate to give an update in relation to what's happening. As I was saying, we have secured over £500,000 from the government to create this team. The team leaders have been brought into place, so they are here, they are working for us now. We are in the process of recruiting some of the other members of the team, but during the course of next financial year, so starting from sort of April, May, they will be beginning to going out and talking to landlords, beginning to make a difference. So they will be driving up standards, and then when the team really gets into full swing, sort of mid-late summer, that I think you will begin to see a difference, or certainly I can come and report a difference that we are making. Councillor Khan.
And I appreciate that, and I think it is a really, really important issue and a key factor in this, but it's not the only factor, is it? Housing standards and housing living accommodation is very important, and it should be of a decent housing standard, but it's not the only factor driving that difference in long-term life expectancy. There is a bigger health picture, and that's perhaps something that from our group's perspective we need to consider or ask for more information on, because there is that the difference not just in housing standards but education, diet, ethnicities, also for various different impacts that do have a variety, an impact on that general outcome. But I do find it really interesting, and I think it is a really important element to tackle, and the proof will be in the pudding as we are starting to address this and we do start to get the message out there. I hope that sends a message to landlords that it isn't going to be acceptable in Derby anymore. You know, you are going to have to book up your standards. And another part of that message for me is making people aware of their rights and responsibilities, their rights from their landlords, and a campaign to that to say, you know, this is healthy living, this is healthy accommodation, and this is your rights. Know your rights and be free to challenge. Councillor West, apologies.
It's fine, don't worry. So Ian, going right back to the beginning of the report, talking about the decent home standard, and I accept that a percentage of that, I don't know what figure it would be, will be tenants who don't want upgrades to be done because it will cause inconvenience and all sorts of things. Is there anything in place in terms of education from the City Council for those tenants so that they understand why those upgrades are necessary and what difference that could make to their lives? And is there any funding available that would help those tenants potentially move out of the house while those works are done? Because I mean, I've had this within my ward, that someone didn't want central heating putting in because of just all the amount of stuff in their house and the disruption to a particular family member. And they paid a huge amount of money to put a lot of possessions in storage so that it was easier for everybody, and made plans for that particular family member to be sort of temporarily rehoused. And then there was a bit of a longer time than they'd anticipated for those works to be done. So is there any money for education or funding for people?
It's a tough one. We did do some work tail end of last year with an organisation called Tenants' Voice, and they did run some workshops with some groups of tenants, and it was exactly that. So it was the point being made about, do you understand what your rights are, and these are your rights, and this is that sort of thing. But it was comparatively small, obviously, given the size of the private rented city. What I'm hoping is that when we do go out to consult selective licensing, additional licensing, that will generate a lot of interest out there, both in terms of providers and tenants. On the back of that, we can do quite a lot of publicity in terms of these are your rights, this is how you should be approached, sort of thing. But if I'm honest, Councillor, I haven't got a pot of money to go out and work with tenants as government is clearly looking at this, and it's not to say that there won't be a pot of money. And as I said, they're certainly looking at the government in terms of legislating to create a decent standard. So whether that would, if it was legislated, whether that would bring funding stream for councils.
Our colleagues at Derby Evening Telegraph will be able to help us with that.
Not in the Derby Evening Telegraph for many years now.
Oh, apologies, the Derby Telegraph, which one it is now, or the Evening Telegraph in general, and our other colleagues elsewhere in the media. It's important that message is put out there, and I think, I don't know from this board's perspective if it's worth a recommendation to Cabinet and the members that as and when this project is kick-started and put into place, that there is a budget around or an element of funding from communications pot to get that information out there to residents, if that's something that you think might be useful.
I suppose some of that comes on the consultation for the Decent Home Standard, which seems to have stalled since sort of 2020 from what I can see online. I mean, I would expect that would be a national programme, very much like the voter ID that's all over the TV at the moment. Yes, we would absolutely have a need to explain those things to people. How that happens, I'm not entirely sure, because obviously you're speaking to a number of groups of people. But also there's a conversation to be had to tenants and landlords. Landlords, some of whom will not live locally. They'll own property here, but they won't live here, or they'll have been their home and they've moved away. So reaching out to those landlords, because I mean, I know full well if you write to those landlords, those letters probably won't get passed on by the tenants because they won't have a way of doing that. But it is something that needs to be looked at, but I think it would probably come once that decent home standard consultation is finished and a new one, because it looks like the last one's from 2006, which is not decent at all. The other thing that I wanted to ask, that sort of in relation to that, there used to be, and I've mentioned this in this committee many times, having been on this committee since the day I was elected, there used to be a star rating for properties in the city that was run by the city council. I don't know, it was a property that I rented a while ago, and it had a lovely plaque on the outside of the building that said it was a 2 out of 3 star property. Is there anything, because I mean, I'm not seeing that come under licensing, but are there any plans for anything like that to come back into play?
No, I think the licensing is a fairly prescribed route that we go down for whether it's selected or additional, and it doesn't involve that sort of plaque. I think that was through an accreditation scheme, which is a more voluntary basis for the scheme. So that isn't on there. I should have just say the proposals around decent homes. It's in a white paper, so it has come up again. It does feel quite current in terms of that white paper.
So, as Councillor Wilson has already suggested, some sort of recommendation going forwards to, even if it's just liaising with the communications team to put some comms out about rights of tenants and just the understanding of why it's important to have those upgrades when offered, or to press for those upgrades to be done. I mean, I'm sure we've all had issues relating to those awful pictures of damp and mould that you showed earlier. I've certainly encountered those. But I mean, that would seem to be the most cost effective and the easiest and quickest to implement. If we could have some sort of recommendation that the comms and marketing team put some comms out, and yeah, hopefully liaise with local media. I'm peering at Nigel over your shoulder, with local media, including radio, because we also know that social media only reaches a tiny percent of the population. We know that a lot of people still get their news from the local paper or from Radio Derby, for instance. So yeah, that would be my recommendation for us as an immediate recommendation.
Second that. Is everybody okay with that
I
recommendation?
just wanted to make a quick comment. I mean, you know, as you said, Derby Telegraph is here, and hopefully they will print a story and people will be more aware of their rights and, you know, what have you. But that alone doesn't mean anything. I mean, I don't know if you've heard about the problems they've had in Prosperity House in Babington Lane. We've actually, you know, been there to visit it as from the neighborhood team with fire officers, with the police, etc. And still, the landlords don't want to do anything about it. And there's, you know, nothing. So until we introduce a system where, you know, whether it's a individual landlord or somebody who owns 50 properties or an outside housing agency, social housing agency, until they know that we have the ability to either go and carry the work out and find them, or, you know, impose strict fines on them. Lots of people who've been renting, you know, for a long time, they know their rights. But the problem is nobody's listening to them. As councillors, I'm sure you had casework where you talk to a housing landlord or a social housing company, and after 6-8 weeks, you're still waiting for a reply. So whilst it's good that we should make people aware of their rights and where to complain to and how to complain to, but we must have a system where when they do complain and don't get anywhere, we as an authority step in to do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely need to do that, Shiraz, but I'm thinking of the remit of this committee. That will obviously come under licensing and planning, and there needs to be, as you keep saying and have said for a long time, there needs to be that joined up working between those two regulatory committees. I'm just looking at recommendations that we can put in from this committee going forward that might make some difference. And if you've got multiple people in a property that suddenly know their rights and start complaining, it might force some landlords to do a bit more work.
And the fact that there's, I think the key point is, just carrying on from that, is that the council are considering enforcement options, and that message needs to get to the landlords just as much as the tenants.
Yeah.
That, you know, from our perspective, as a city, that we don't want our residents to have to tolerate that kind of living standards anymore. So if there is any information that any local media people might require, Mr. Fulliger is always on the other side of an email for some lovely information and what we can do going forward. And I think that's a real key point that we should carry through as this board, and put that through, if we could, Lindsay, to the cabinet member, to ask them to take up that challenge. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Anything else for Ian this evening?
No, it looks like he needs him back.
Me too, Ian. Thank you very much for your time. I am conscious of trying to be finally on to the last item, so thank you very much. Obviously, I think this is our last meeting for our next all-out elections, which will be changed. I think, as it stands, I think it is only right to allow the work programme to be arranged as and when those are carried forward with the remits that are put out within this item line as printed. Are you all happy with that? Any questions, challenges? Lovely. Then I will thank everybody for their attendance, their time. It's been a long but interesting meeting with some really key points there. Thank you.